Hey heroes, welcome to another uncanny episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. This week we begin with a race of emotional energy parasites who reside in a psychic dimension. Sometimes called revenants, we know this species as the Mummudrai, a name given to them by the Shi'ar. According to Shi'ar legend, whenever a living being is conceived, a Mummudrai is created alongside them, an alien anti-self that each individual must face before being born, as their first encounter with the unknown. Once a person is born, their bodiless revenant dies before going on to watch from beyond the veil, feeding on their twins' negative emotions while growing envious of their life in the light. However, in the case of the powerful telepath Charles Xavier, something a little different happened. When he was conceived by Brian and Sharon Xavier, the accompanying Mummudrai copied the fetus's DNA and used it to create a physical body for itself, essentially becoming his genetic twin. Over the following months, the two developed alongside one another until shortly before their birth. While still in the womb, Charles Xavier became aware of the malevolent entity beside him and lashed out, attempting to kill it. He initially seemed to be successful as the Mummudrai's physical body perished. Believed to be Charles's twin sister, the stillborn baby was named Cassandra. However, the Mummudrai itself survived in the form of chaotic cellular matter. After being discarded, it clung to a sewer wall where it slowly rebuilt itself over the course of 4 decades. Using the DNA it had already copied to mimic human traits, the Mummudrai took the name Cassandra Nova. However, Cassandra had a skewed perception of reality due to the peculiar circumstances of her birth, believing that she was still within Sharon Xavier's womb, and that she and her brother were the only people in the universe who were real. Because of this, she also thought that killing her brother would give her full control over their shared reality. By this point, Charles had become Professor X, and founded the team of mutant superheroes, the X-Men. In her schemes to demoralize and defeat him, Cassandra sought to make use of the Sentinels, mutant hunting robots who had clashed with the X-Men on numerous occasions. These machines were originally the creation of the noted anthropologist Bolivar Trask. His studies on the emergence of mutant kind began when he discovered that his own children, Lawrence and Tanya, were mutants, the latter of which disappeared when her powers caused her to phase out of time, and eventually wound up in a future timeline where she became known as Madam Sanctity. She ultimately became a high priestess in Clan Askani, a sisterhood dedicated to opposing the ancient mutant apocalypse. This was the same future timeline where Nathan Summers was raised, eventually growing into the time-traveling freedom fighter Cable, but that's a story for another time. Also, as one last piece of this side note, if you're a long-time viewer of the channel, you may recall that at one point, Cyclops and Jean Grey traveled back in time and witnessed the origin of Mr. Sinister. Well, it was actually Madam Sanctity who sent them, primarily because doing so would ensure that Nathaniel Essex became Mr. Sinister, kicking off the series of events that resulted in the birth of Cable. But for more details on that, you can check out my video on Mr. Sinister himself. But now let's get back to the story at hand and the rest of the Trask family. While Bolivar's daughter disappeared into the time stream, his son Larry was burdened with precognitive abilities. And so Bolivar designed an amulet that suppressed his son's powers as long as he wore it. After studying the emergence of mutant kind, Bolivar Trask became convinced that mutants would eventually dominate the Earth. Wanting to protect mankind from the threat of a united mutant attack, he designed and built the first Sentinel prototype, a 30-foot-tall humanoid robot dubbed Master Mold, named thus because it was meant to automate the production of the initial wave of Mark I Sentinels. It was these Mark Is that were unveiled to the world during a televised debate between Bolivar Trask and Charles Xavier. It's important to note that while Xavier was a vocal advocate of mutant rights, he was not publicly out as a mutant himself at the time. Another important detail for today's story is that Trask included as a core part of Sentinel programming that those sharing his DNA should be preserved. Despite this failsafe, Master Mold determined that the best way to protect mankind was for Sentinels to seize control of the world themselves. Naturally, this all led to the first confrontation between the X-Men and the Sentinels. In the end, Trask sacrificed his own life to stop Master Mold, but his designs would serve as the basis for all future Sentinel technology. The second generation of Sentinels, even larger and more powerful than the first, were built by Bolivar's son, Lawrence. Ignorant of his own mutant nature, Larry Trask mistakenly blamed the X-Men for his father's death. The Mark IIs battled the X-Men and later the mighty Avengers, the latter of which were aided by a repentant Larry who was ultimately crushed by a falling Sentinel upon their defeat. Since then, there have been many other incarnations and versions of the Sentinels, such as those built by Dr. Stephen Lang using Larry Trask's notes. But unbeknownst to Lang and most others who used this technology, before his death, Bolivar Trask had partnered with a Black Ops government program to build a second Master Mold. This machine, located in the jungles of Ecuador, was programmed to scavenge technology within a specific test radius and use it to create Sentinels of various shapes and sizes. Left to their own devices for over a decade, these wild Sentinels were highly adaptable, but unlike some other incarnations, they retained their original programming to protect and obey members of the Trask bloodline. This is where we turn our attention back to Cassandra Nova, for it was her who discovered this Ecuadorian Master Mold and the wild Sentinels. Of course, due to the DNA that she had copied from her brother, she was, for all intents and purposes, a mutant as well. As such, if she wanted to use these machines, she would need a way to control them. Enter Donald Trask III. Unlike his uncle, Bolivar, or his cousin, Larry, Donald had nothing to do with Sentinels or mutants. He was simply a dentist in Albuquerque, but he was also one of Bolivar Trask's last living relatives. Thus, Cassandra Nova found Donald and brought him to the Ecuadorian jungle, where she confirmed that the wild Sentinels would not attack him. Posing as a government operative, Cassandra manipulated the meek man into commanding Master Mold for her, expanding its parameters. All the while, she was using her Mummudrai abilities to copy Donald's DNA, killing him once the process was completed and the Sentinels recognized her as a Trask. She also injected herself with microscopic nano-Sentinels, but we'll come back to those in a bit. While all this was happening, Hank McCoy, the X-Man known as the Beast, was putting the finishing touches on Cerebra, an updated version of Xavier's previous mutant-detecting device, Cerebro. When this machine was activated, Hank briefly noticed a large spike of mutant energy in South America before it mysteriously disappeared. Cyclops and Wolverine were on the way home after rescuing an Australian mutant named Ugly John, and so they were asked to detour to Ecuador and investigate. However, once they arrived, their plane, the X-Wing, was brought down by wild Sentinels, and the three mutants were captured. Wolverine and Cyclops ultimately escaped and captured Cassandra, but not before Ugly John was fatally injured. Furthermore, Cassandra had already dispatched a squad of Sentinels to launch an assault on the world's most concentrated population of mutants, the island nation of Genosha. This was a country with an unsavory history regarding its native mutant population, having exploited and enslaved them to build much of its infrastructure in the past. But by this point, after a number of rebellions and civil wars, Genosha had become a safe haven for mutants under Magneto's rule. Or so they thought. The country, and indeed the world, was blindsided by the sudden attack of Cassandra Nova's wild Sentinels. Most notable among them was one of the largest Sentinels mutant kind had ever encountered, a three-headed monstrosity dubbed the Wild Mega Sentinel. In less than an hour, the vast majority of Genosha's population was exterminated, with the final death toll surpassing 16 million mutants. One of the few survivors was the White Queen, Emma Frost, who was saved by the activation of a secondary mutation that transformed her body into living diamond. In the wake of this genocide, Cassandra Nova was taken back to the X-Mansion and held captive, while Xavier decided her fate. The Beast examined her, determining that she was unlike any biological specimen he had ever studied. However, before any action could be taken, she broke free from containment, displaying abilities beyond those she copied from Xavier. In addition to a gamut of psionic powers, her control over her own cells also afforded her a healing factor, as well as the ability to become intangible. With this, she was able to phase through the wall and reach Cerebra. While Cassandra augmented her power with the machine, Emma Frost snuck up behind her and broke her neck. But unbeknownst to Emma or the X-Men, Cassandra had already used Cerebra to swap minds with her brother Charles. Furthermore, before Charles could attempt to explain, Cassandra used his body to shoot the one that he now inhabited. Punctuating the Mummudrai's inhumanity, the body Cassandra Nova had created seemingly died in a puddle of bright blue blood. But this also served to release the nano-sentinels in that blood, which then infected the X-Men and slowly began wearing down their immune systems. While inhabiting Xavier's body, Cassandra publicly outed him as a mutant. The Xavier Institute, previously a safe haven for mutants, was suddenly the site of bigoted graffiti and protests. The Beast, meanwhile, kept Cassandra's body preserved and discovered how her DNA matched Xavier's. He confronted the professor about this, only for Cassandra to launch a vicious psionic attack against him. The ensuing scuffle was interrupted by the Beast's young student, Beak, but Cassandra telepathically forced the boy to savagely beat his mentor with a titanium baseball bat, leaving him in a coma. And shortly after that, Xavier was visited by his alien consort, Empress Lilandra of the Shi'ar Imperium. Witnessing the massive spacecraft, Cassandra imagined the Shi'ar's destructive potential and decided to leave Earth with them. However, while she was away, her brother took the opportunity to make his move. You see, the body that she had made for herself and subsequently trapped Charles in was never truly human. And so while it was badly damaged beyond Xavier's ability to operate, his consciousness survived inside of it. Still able to use his telepathic powers to some degree, Charles reached out and took control of the Beast's limbic system, piloting his body just enough to warn the other X-Men. Following this, the Beast fully recovered from his injuries and awakened, largely thanks to his own mutation enhancing his physicality. Meanwhile, Jean Grey and Emma Frost used their own psychic powers to examine the brain that Charles was trapped in. Slowly, the X-Men began piecing together what they were dealing with. Lilandra and the Shi'ar also recognized that Xavier was not himself, and Cassandra Nova revealed her true Revenant form. Of course, as an ethereal being of pure emotional energy, she still needed her brother's body to operate and stay anchored to the physical world. Realizing they would not be able to stop this creature alone, Lilandra commanded one of her Imperial Guardsmen, Smasher, to travel to Earth and warn the X-Men. But when their ship was damaged, Smasher was thrown towards the planet and injured by the crash landing. Following this, Cassandra successfully used Xavier's powers to mentally manipulate Lilandra. The Shi'ar Empress was forced to believe that Xavier was the only mutant not infected by Cassandra Nova. As such, Gladiator and his elite Imperial Guard were sent to Earth and ordered to cleanse the planet. One of these alien attackers was a shape-shifting biocomputer called Stuff, which clashed with Emma Frost's students, the Stepford Cuckoos. Cyclops and another X-Man, Kuan Yin Xorn, were taken captive by the Shi'ar, but ultimately escaped. The tide of battle began to turn again when an injured Smasher warned Gladiator that Cassandra had possessed Xavier and was controlling Lilandra. When Cassandra then came to Earth, the Imperial Guard turned against her, but Xavier's powers allowed her to topple even the mightiest opponents. Meanwhile, Cassandra's original body continued to deteriorate, nearing the point where Xavier's mind would no longer be able to survive inside of it. Stopping Beast from attempting to repair it, Jean Grey voluntarily took Xavier's consciousness and stored it in her own memories. While the sickness she suffered as a result of the nano-sentinels in her bloodstream made this impossible to maintain, Xorn was able to use his healing powers to destroy them. Finally realizing the full truth of what Cassandra Nova was, Charles and Jean concocted a plan to stop her once and for all. Using Cerebra, Jean was able to split Xavier's consciousness, with every mutant on Earth holding a piece of his mind. After that, Cassandra entered Cerebra once again, intending on using it to wipe out mutant kind. However, when she connected her mind to those of every mutant on Earth, it allowed Charles to reassemble himself and reclaim his body. Forced out of his physical form, the Mummudrai lost much of its cognitive faculties and relied on an instinctual desire to inhabit another body. Emma Frost arrived to offer one, claiming that Cassandra's previous body was still alive. The Mummudrai accepted this body in exchange for sparing Emma and the Stepford Cuckoos. However, this body was actually the Shi'ar biocomputer super guardian Stuff, whose mind had been taken over by the Cuckoos. Trapped in a synthetic brain, Cassandra's impaired mind was forced to experience a pre-programmed school lesson delivered by an illusory Charles and Jean. Stuff's dormant body was then sealed away within a virtually impenetrable lockbox. But it seems that Cassandra Nova had enough power left for one more desperate act before she was locked away, and planted a hypnotic suggestion deep within Emma's mind. This mental implant fed on Emma's survivor's guilt from the destruction of Genosha and grew over time. Meanwhile, the X-Men suffered more losses as Xorn began impersonating Magneto, got addicted to a power-enhancing drug, destroyed the Xavier Institute, launched a devastating attack on New York, and killed Jean Grey before being beheaded by Wolverine. After that mess, the artificial intelligence for the mansion's training facility, the Danger Room, went rogue and attacked the X-Men as the robotic Danger. Intent on killing Xavier, Danger traveled to the ruins of Genosha and uploaded her programming into the dormant wild Mega Sentinel, granting it intelligence. This led to a battle with the X-Men on Genosha, where the giant machine unleashed a swarm of smaller wild Sentinels. While her allies fought, the X-Man Kitty Pryde used her intangibility powers to enter the Mega Sentinel. She convinced the machine to unblock its memories of the Genoshan massacre, overwhelming its newly acquired conscience, and the Mega Sentinel fled into space. Of course, this conflict only served to worsen the mental delusion that Cassandra had implanted in Emma. The White Queen came to believe that Cassandra had returned and recruited her into a new incarnation of the Hellfire Club, a power-hungry and influential organization that she was previously a member of. Included among this club's illusory members was Negasonic Teenage Warhead, a student of Emma's who, in actuality, lost her life in the attack on Genosha. Cassandra's implant also caused Emma to believe that the two had colluded to ensure that Emma would survive Genosha by creating her secondary mutation, which was never actually the case. Betraying her allies, Emma generated psychic projections of Negasonic, Sebastian Shaw, and Cassandra Nova to confront the X-Men. She even created a cloaked figure which was eventually revealed to be Emma herself, as she was before she reformed and joined the X-Men. Most importantly, she created an illusion that tricked Kitty Pryde into believing that she and Colossus had a child named Michael. With this as a basis, Kitty was manipulated into phasing through a nigh-impenetrable lockbox stored beneath the X-Mansion. She believed she was rescuing her son when in reality she released the alien stuff containing Cassandra Nova's consciousness. Following this, the X-Men realized that Emma's betrayal was the fault of the Mummudrai, a desperate backup plan to be released. But before they could properly deal with the situation and reseal stuff, they were interrupted by danger and an alien adversary named Ord. Fortunately, this attack also interrupted Cassandra's attempts to reach out and claim a new host body. But complicating matters further, both the X-Men and their adversaries were teleported away by the espionage agency SWORD. Aboard the SWORD vessel, the alien psychic Sidron confirmed that any trace of Cassandra Nova had been expelled from Emma's mind. However, there was little time to ponder the Mummudrai's whereabouts as the X-Men were recruited to deal with a looming crisis on Ord's home planet, Breakworld. At the height of the ensuing conflict, a 10-mile-long bullet was fired at the Earth, while Kitty Pryde was trapped within. The Mega Sentinel witnessed its approach and, having come to appreciate the value of life, attempted to intercept it. However, the massive bullet tore through the machine with ease, destroying it once and for all. In the end, it was Kitty Pryde who saved the Earth, pushing her powers to their limits to render the entire projectile completely intangible, long enough for it to harmlessly pass through the planet. Of course, in all this excitement and confusion, Cassandra Nova had slipped through the cracks, her biosynthetic prison having been left behind on Earth. By the time they got back to it, her mind was gone, and while the question of the Mummudrai's whereabouts lingered, after years of inactivity it was presumed dead. However, Cassandra Nova did escape and eventually resurfaced with a healthy new body. For what happened next, you can read 2018's X-Men Red series, which features a team led by a freshly resurrected Jean Grey. For another conflict involving the Mummudrai, you can check out the Uncanny X-Force series from 2013 and 2014, in which a future version of Cassandra Nova attempted to launch a Revenant invasion on Earth. But that is all I have for you this week, and so thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places that you can find me. Let me also give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And of course, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!